Trees. They are one of the most crucial parts of any Minecraft project. Therefore, you need to know how to build them if you want to define yourself as a good builder. Today, I want to help you by explaining how to use Axiom to speed up the making of trees. I will start with the most basic and fast techniques, and later the more complex ones. The first thing our tree is gonna need is a trunk. The trunk is the base of our tree, so a good one is necessary to achieve better than decent result. The trunk and the branches will give us a basic shape of the tree, so think about the result you want at the end before building the trunk and the branches. A straight trunk is used to make a conifer like a pine, a spruce or a fir. A slightly slanted trunk can work in pretty much every case. If you just want to build a random tree and you do not have a lot of ideas on the end result, just try a slanted trunk, not too twisted, and the end result will probably come out okay. A twisted trunk will make the tree more interesting, but it's exponentially more hard to realize in a good and realistic way. It can be easier to realize on a large scale, but it will always be a bigger time commitment than a straighter trunk. You can make tree with multiple trunks, but I find that doesn't really work well most of the times. With small trees, it's easier to make the trunk by hand, so I suggest using Axiom's tool only when you are working with a big tree, at least 15 blocks in height. The branches of a tree are probably the next most important part after the trunk. They will be the scaffolding upon which you will build the leaves. Even when the branches will be mostly covered by leaves, it is important to give them a good and realistic shape. Most of the time, the branches are made in the same style as the trunk, but sometimes it's better to give them a different temporary color if you are using Axiom or mods like that. In this way, you will be able to work and paint on them separately, using masks or even just by selecting the blocks. The leaves crown of the tree is probably the area on which the eye will first focus, so it is important to give it a brighter color in comparison to the trunk and branches. The shape of the crown can vary greatly, and more than one shape can work on a single trunk, so you have a lot of options with it. The only really important thing you need to know is that you need to leave a lot of empty space between the blocks. A common error is to replicate vanilla Minecraft style and fill out the space, but in that way, especially on larger projects, it doesn't look realistic at all. Also, if you want to use a lot of different contrasting colors for your leaves, I suggest making the side facing the sky lighter than the one facing the ground. If you want to use some transparent blocks, I suggest putting them at the edges. It will give a better illusion of leaves thinning out far from the branches. If you want to make a dead tree, just don't add leaves or add very few. Use a brownish or grey color, like mangrove roots. That will give a better depth impression. A good way to differentiate the different tree you made is using colors to make them stand out. In general, I suggest to use some kind of brown for the trunk, but if you think it looks good, you can pretty much use any block you want. A dull and dark color works better in most situations, so generally you don't want to use saturated or light colors. If the tree is meant to be seen only from afar, the texture doesn't really matter, but if you want to make it look better when it's near you, then The texture is very important. Sometimes the texture is more important than the colors. It's a pretty hard thing to do, and you can't do it in a lot of projects, but if you can, use the color for shading. This will make the tree more realistic. When it comes to coloring the leaves, I suggest using some lighter color. For a realistic tree, green is the best choice, but if you want to make something less grounded in reality, orange, yellow, pink, white and generally any other pastel color can work really well. Using multiple colors for the leaves is okay, but too many and it becomes not really good. So try using a single color or maybe some variation of it. I think it's time to stop talking and actually show you how to proper work. The first thing we will make is some small trees. Small trees are way more important than people give credit to them. They can make a bigger project look way better. For example, I made this build, it's a pretty quick and simple thing. Didn't really spend a lot of time on this, but a thing that really enhances this build are all the small trees I put around this forest. If you create a forest with only big trees, it will look kinda awkward, so I think it's better to build stuff like this, even some simple bushes or one or two leaves blocks on the ground. From above, it will look way better. On this scale, I build trees mostly by hand because, it takes just like half a minute to build one of these, and I make some different variation in height, like this, and I change style. I always leave a lot of space between the leaves. In this way, when you are far from them and the leaves become solid blocks, they still appear like they have some air in them. Mangrove leaves feel very dense, so when I build a tree with them, I use less of them. Birch leaves are probably the one that appear emptier. Sometimes, when you make a tree of a medium size, something like a fence, is not big enough for the trunk. You can test out different styles with some walls, like in this case, or even with full blocks. I think this is a little bit too much, so if you want to see the tree from afar, probably something like blackstone walls I think are the better option here, but up close something like this has a pretty ugly texture, so it depends on the context you're using the tree. From really far, even the simple full blocks can work decently well. Something that you can do is use different leaf blocks on your trees. And other than leaves, some other blocks that can work, especially if you are far from them, are grass or fern. Making bushes is really simple. You just put a couple of blocks down and you have your little bush. This is probably even too high, but yeah, they can be really good when used in the right way, even some pretty simple stuff like this. One of my favorite ways to use them is with the stamp tool. You can just create blueprints and then add them in here. In this way you can paint an entire forest in a few seconds. The only lengthy part is adding all of the blueprints. That is literally the task that requires the biggest amount of time. Right now I just made something really simple, and as you can see, This is pretty strange because there are more trees than grasses and little bushes, so you can adjust the percentages in this way so that the forest doesn't appear that unnatural. This can work. Let's see. It's probably still a little bit too dense. One thing you can do is to make the minimal spacing bigger. In this way, there will be way more blocks between the things. Right now I have just picked some random blueprints, so it's not really good, and as you can see here there are no trees, but you can fix that in no time, so it's not that big of a deal. If I was making a realistic forest, I would probably put a lot of bigger trees between these small trees, but it also depends on what your end goal is. For example, even something as simple as this patch over here can work from afar, it's not that bad, especially if you do it on a slanted terrain. This terrain over here, which I made in probably a couple minutes, it's just the elevation tool and a little bit of smoothing, can become way more interesting just in a few seconds with the stamp tool. There are some problems in this way. Some grasses are floating. A simple and probably decently lazy way to fix it is to just use the extend foundation to ground, which simply extend the lower block of a blueprint down. I don't know why it didn't do it with grass, but as you can see, with full blocks it does exactly that. It can be pretty useful, but it's also situational. It very well depends on what blueprints you are using. Now from afar, this terrain is still pretty simple, but it is definitely way more interesting. And if we now add some very big trees to the mix, then I suggest using a very small chance of appearing between the small trees, something around 1% or lower. I normally use like 0.5, 0.3 even, if you're using a really big tree. You can press shift and then right click to just change the amount with your keyboard. Using the slider can be a little bit difficult, but it's faster, so on projects like these where I don't want to fine-tune every single little detail. Let's see what results we will get now. Yeah, it's not that good, it's a pretty simple forest, and definitely there are some problems because the mountain is still a literal mountain of dirt, so it's pretty bad looking. I think there was a little bit too much space between the trees. It's not that bad. It's pretty simple, and from afar it definitely looks better than when you're near it. But if you were walking on these, and you made a good terrain and not just a mountain of dirt, it probably look decently. Let's now try building some medium trees. Smaller trees are pretty simple to build, and you hardly need the Axiom to build them, but with medium trees, it can be pretty interesting because sometimes you want to build them with Axiom, but it depends on what you want to do. I will show you some techniques that you can do with or without axioms, and some techniques you will be only able to do if you use Axiom. Let's first start with some medium trees that are on the smaller side. For example, something as simple as this tree. This trunk uses only one block, so it's really simple, and the leaves are just another block. You can just create some kind of simple shape. Maybe if you want to add them, you can add some roots at the base, like this. It's a really simple thing to do. These here are just some very simple branches. Okay, now it's probably a little bit better. And let's build with leaves. You can use pretty much whatever type of leaves you like, but yes. Now, I could start building the entire tree with leaves, but it will take a lot of time, so what you can do is to simply use the rock tool. Now that you have created some blobs with the rock tool, you can just create a very simple noise painter. Just select the leaves and put around 65-70% hair, and the rest will be leaves. You can also change your leaves over here, so for example, maybe I want oak leaves and not jungle leaves. And let's see, maybe here there is even too much hair, but you can fix that really easily. Especially on the lower side, you will probably want to make the tree a little bit better, or just retry what you've done before. This is way less hairy, and as you can see, there are still some problems, but you can fix them by hand. It's not that good of a tree, and you need to work on it a little bit longer, but it can work. Create a very simple trunk, like this, and then put onto it some simple spheres. You can do it with a lot of different tools, but even something as simple as these, and then try out some stuff to make it look better. You can create some simple trees like this one over here. With this simple technique, you can create trees that are a little bit bigger, like this one over here, which is simple, but it can work. Now, when it comes to creating very big trees, or not really very big, but pretty big, like this one over here, which I would definitely define as pretty big, I think that the best way is to mostly do the trunk with Axiom. I will later show you how, and then the leaves can be made in a ton of different techniques. You can choose whatever you want. The simplest is to just make shapes, then substitute most blocks with air, and the other ones will be colored into leaves. In this case, I don't really remember how I made the tree, but it's pretty simple. And the colors on the trunk were just made with the auto shade tool, which is pretty lazy, I know, but it can work on trees of this size. In this case over here, I just used a simple texture with the noise painter. When you are making a tree, you can add some simple details that will make it a little bit better, like some leaves at the base, some ferns, if you want some mushrooms, vines, or stuff like that. When you are making a tree, I suggest to not make different trunks coming from a single base. At that point, just make different trees. It looks strange. From afar, it can be good, but I don't really know why or how, but it doesn't look right. So just make a single trunk for your tree. That is most of the time the better option. And when it comes to the shape of the crown of leaves, just do whatever you think is good. I think that the best way is to start with a pretty flat bottom, and then if you want, add something like these hanging leaves that I added here, or tape it a little upwards like here, because it follows the shape of the branches, or make the leaves fall down like over here. This is a pretty bad tree that I made a long time ago, but I still want to show you, because even a tree like this, which up close is definitely not good, it's pretty strange. It has a lot of leaves, a very skinny trunk, it's all really dark, so most of the time you can't even see the branches. But from afar, something like this can work. Which, you know, when I first built this, I thought, maybe I should redo it. Maybe I should create a larger trunk, which I should definitely do, but still, in a big forest, if you're looking down to this tree, it doesn't look that bad. And its leaves are quite okay, so even something that initially you think looks bad, do not throw that directly into the bin. Always save it as a blueprint. Maybe, someday, you will find a way to use it. A simple thing you can do to test your trees is create a simple ambience that you think is the one where you will use them. For example, here with the stamp tool, I stamp a really simple forest on a ground that is not completely flat, but almost, and I think it looks quite right. Even if some trees over here are not perfect, this is not bad. And you could probably add some little buildings, some cities in here, you could do maybe some roads, and from a simple idea you can make a lot. Let's just do cut multiron spline. So, in this way, we can make the trunk of our tree. I'll make a pretty big tree. I will probably regret this later, because it will take a very long time. Lately, I have a problem of making trees that are too tall. You shouldn't make a tree too tall, because of a lot of limitation of the game, but also because it's more difficult to work on. I will now make a very simple trunk and some branches. Obviously, the more point you will add to this line, the more natural it will feel. Now I am just doing it to show you, so the end result will not be that good. Later I will show you what you can get with this technique, which is something that will be way better than this. Okay, now I have made some big branches. The tree isn't really good, so I will blend it a little bit with the terrain around. In this way it will look more natural. The well tool in this case is pretty good, but do not rely on it too much, because especially on smaller project you can't really use it, so yeah, it's limited. Then with the smooth tool, which always help, choose a very low strength setting, and then maybe you should also increase the radius, and then just smooth your tree. Do not use a high strength setting in this case, because it will mess up a lot of your branches. But I would say for now it's really ugly as a tree, but it's because we just have the main branches. Now this here will be all set in the same color, but sometimes you want to make something different with the small branches, so I suggest picking a different type of block. Yeah, this tree is definitely too big from what I'm doing right now, so I will just focus on these branches over here. Forget this part over here, you can just use the techniques I'm showing you to complete the tree. A thing I see people struggle with is the center part of the tree, and I think that's something that people always forget, is to put small branches not only at the edges of the big branches, but even somewhere like here. Because if you just start small branches from the end of the other branches you made, you'll get a big hole over here in the center of the tree, and it will definitely look ugly. You don't really need to make them as good as the external branches. They are the ones that will be seen, like from here. There will be leaves over here, so you will not see this one. Now, the last part. You can even work with these, but I prefer making some last pieces, which are the very small branches. You can do them really fast, and in these cases even straight lines can work, or at least if they are not to be seen close up, like this one over here that I just made. It's a really brutal and long type of build. If you don't like building trees, you will definitely not like building big trees, because they are always so long to build. They are really fun, because the end project, if you're good, will turn out really good, and I think they are one of the better looking build when you know how to do them, but it's really hard work, so if you don't like them, just don't do them. The fun thing with small branches is that you can curve them however you like, so in many cases I like to put them on a downward curve. Right now I just made them pretty fast, so they are simple. If you used a completely different color with the very small branches, which I actually didn't make this time, but I can fix them in a few seconds. So I now have made some small branches with this color. Then we can make something for the leaves. Just put some conditions. In this case, the block we will color is air, and the block below the block we will color will always be the block that makes up the smaller branches. I little inverted the conditions. You need this block to be air and this block to be... Well, now it worked. Now the blocks will be air, and near, in a radius of 1, it should be one of the type of leaves we used. Then let's add air as a condition. In this case, around 32% should work. Maybe a little bit more, like 50. Okay, I think this can work. Then redo that, but with more air each time. These obviously will get some strange results, but I think that sometimes it can work. It will leave a lot of branches exposed, so you need to color them right if you want these to work. Now, I will use the rock tool, but there are many ways to do this. I will just make some random shapes. Spheres can be used, but ellipsoids are probably the better option. Choose a little bit of a larger radius and a small height. In this way you will create these flat blobs. A big noise radius also can help in creating random blobs. This is definitely one of the lazier techniques, but if you need to work on a really big project, it can work. Just create the blobs onto the smaller branches, like this. Be sure to cover them all up, and then create even some extra blobs that are not on branches. These techniques can also be used to cover up the larger branches if you don't like them, or if you are lazy and don't want to make all the smaller branches, you can just make the blob onto the big ones. It will be kind of strange, and right now this tree needs definitely more branches, so I will probably put a branch over here that goes in this direction and put some more leaves here, but right now I don't have that branch, so I will just try to work with these ones. From this perspective it looks like a normal tree. Now let's just create a very simple mask. We just need to choose our block, which is the one we used for the blobs, and then paint them. Be sure to paint only the surface. Start with something like this, with a lot of air and very few leaves. It's better to do this all in a single time. Every time you color some new blocks, just increase the amount of leaves. You can also use different colors to create different effects. And now let's just delete surface. Now these techniques definitely can work sometimes, but I would not call it my favorite. Another interesting way to make shapes is pretty interesting in my opinion. It's a little bit difficult, but and it's definitely the one that requires the longest time, but it's one of my favorite. Let's select a random height map, use a big rate, in this way it will be easier to work, and just create some random shapes. Now, the best tool is probably the shape tool. Just create some kind of super sphere, so separate the different axes. And the most important part, apart from this balance over here, make it hollow and then metable. Also, you need to let existing thing remain. Probably a metable of 3 is good here. And also be sure to not use the blocks that your terrain is made of. Use some terrain to create these blobs of different sizes and different angles. Cut all of these shapes and see what you are working with. These shapes over here can be used as somewhat leaves or clump of leaves. This is just the base of what it will be later. Just copy them and paste them a little bit around your tree. This techniques is probably better used on big branches. As you can see, this covers a lot of the thing I wanted to be shown, so I will put it onto a big branch. This is probably too big. I will just use a smaller one. One thing that I suggest to you is to not overuse a single sphere like I'm using it right now, because the shape will be repeating itself. So let's use another thing. During this kind of operation I suggest to not use shaders as I am doing right now, because I forgot to turn them off, and when you are building with Axiom with a lot of shaders, I don't know why they really do that, but all the blocks that you are working with become transparent, so it's not that good. Now, just paint all of the blobs that you put down, and the way we will paint them is by creating mostly some dark blocks like green terracotta and green concrete, and a little bit of air because it can work better, I think. We just need to make a pretty simple mask. Adjacent to and near are pretty simple, but there is a little bit of a difference. These are the blocks adjacent to the copper blocks, and these are the blocks near, on a radius of 1, of the copper blocks. As always, use the target block of air, and then paint it with some dark leaves like mangrove, and spruce is probably a little bit too dark, so let's just use birch. And now we have created a pretty simple way. We can do way more with these. For example, I would like to do is to put the darker blocks on the bottom. So instead of using near and adjacent, we will use above and use these blocks here on above. Now we will only color the bottom part with these blocks over here. The top part can be colored with lighter blocks, for example, acacia leaves and oak leaves. In this case we will use below and not above. This obviously is a pretty simple color palette, and as you can see on the sides there are practically no leaves. We can really simply fix these mistakes, but I think that if you put enough effort into building a tree like this, even a technique as simple as this can really feel good. It very well depends on what is the angle your tree should be seen. From below, imagine just this part, this tree looks strange because I didn't really do a good job on making the leaves onto the branches, but from above it definitely looks better because you can see all the little branches under the leaves. You can also add a lot more layers than the ones I made right here. This is obviously a little bit too much leaves, but I just did it to make them a little bit different. In this way the the branches below are covered, but yeah, those are definitely too many leaves. Another cool thing that I really like to do is to put glass on top of here. Using some glass will make the color way lighter, so I never use a lot of it, but as of now this tree looks way better from above than from below. What is a way to make this also, it looks way better above or below than on the side, but that is easily fixable with simply some coloring. Now we'll focus on the lower part. An interesting way to add some detail to the lower part is adding some hanging vines. There are many ways to do this, but a very simple and fast technique is just to, as always, use the selection block of air and use the block above as, I don't know, something like one of the blocks over there. For example, there is mangrove leaves. Now we will paint 80% with air, but around 20-25% with other mangrove leaves. Now that we have our hanging vines, we can make something to make them look cooler. Use always the block above as this one, but now randomize the seed and choose something like a bamboo pole or directly even the bamboo plant. Use the bamboo plant, then below that we can use something like, in this case probably we should do all of them with something like mangrove propagulate with an age of 4, and we added something like this. We can also add some light to them with something like the end rods, or something that you can do if there is a lot of light and you want to add that to the ambience. you can add flowers. I put just a few of them right here, but the result can be way better if you put a lot of effort and time into making your tree. This here is a small project that I literally made in like 2 hours, maybe a little bit less. I simply created some islands with the elevated tool. I painted them with the right colors and then put on them a lot of trees. I think that this palm here were ripped off from the Breath of the Wild project by Gravity. They are not mine, but I didn't want to spend time creating trees at that point, so that's a thing that you can do. You can just use blueprints that are made by other peoples. It is not really moral, so I wouldn't do it in a serious project, but this was just something that I wanted to make in a few minutes. This over here is a project that took me around 5 hours. Around half an hour was spent on making the terrain, that was the easier part, and the trees over here were all made before, so I didn't really have to create new trees, except for the very big one over here in the center. I definitely made the trunk too thin, I wanted something bigger. As you can see, some branches do not even have leaves on top of them. I quite rushed this project. The tree itself is colored with a very simple texture. I just made it with the noise painter tool. But if you want to spend a lot of time on it, you can shade your tree. Then I moved to the branches, which were by far I spent probably 3 hours on making the branches and the leaves. As you can see, I didn't really put a lot of leaves in this tree. There are holes in the canopy, but I think it still looks decent. I put a lot of glass on top of the tree, which is probably a strange choice. I normally do not do that, but this time I wanted, so I did it. And for the hanging vines, or in this case I think they are more just a part of the leaves, I used this style over here, which I think looks really good from afar, because the fences are pretty thick and there are not many flowers, but from afar they look quite nice. Now, a really cool thing that you can do is with the time slider, you can just see your tree at different moment in the day. There are a lot of mods that let you do this, but it's a built-in feature of Axiom, so I can do it just fine with this. And I think that at night, especially from below it looks pretty good. Also, I don't really know why, but the flowers make a little bit of dim light. I never noticed it. I don't know why. But yeah, I think it's decently. I think it's definitely decent for a project that I made in 5 hours, 5 hours and a half maybe. There is still some big room for improvement, like some branches that do not have leaves, but I think it's still very good. I didn't remember that for the leaves of this tree I made some blobs, but I put some of the blocks onto it before putting them onto the tree. And I built the hanging vines with a temporary block before coloring them. But yes, these are the blobs that I used for building the tree with the technique I showed you previously. Now that you have watched this video, practice the techniques I told you, and you will be a way better builder. With practice comes perfection. So, if you want to improve, simply continue building. If your trees still looks bad, don't be upset. With time, everyone can improve. And if you're lazy and don't want to wait a long time, just replicate the designs I made in this video or anyone else's designs. If you have some more questions you clicked this video to receive the answer to, but you didn't get, then ask me down in the comments. If this video was useful to you and you want to see more videos like this in the future, then subscribe. Thank you, and see you next time. Sorry if I have not made a video in 2 weeks, but I was busy going on vacation and then playing all on Axiom song.